Before we begin, if you enjoy deep dives into the hidden stories and unsung heroes of the Second World War, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to bring these incredible narratives to life. Iron Bottom Sound, north of Guadalcanal. 01:43 hours, October 12, 1942. The night was a suffocating blanket of black velvet, starless and moonless. Rain fell in thick, vertical sheets, hissing as it struck the steel skin of HMS Vigilant. The destroyer, a lean N-class hunter, sliced through the 2-meter swell, her hull plates groaning under the strain. On the open bridge, Lieutenant Commander Jack "Salty" Rourke gripped the rain-slicked rail, his knuckles white. He was a man carved from coastal rock, his face a map of salt and sun. He hated this place. They all did. They called this patch of water Iron Bottom Sound for the graveyard of Allied and Japanese steel that littered the seabed beneath them. "Anything, number one?" Rourke's voice was a low growl, barely cutting through the howl of the wind and the rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of their own turbines. His executive officer, Lieutenant Davies, lowered his binoculars. "Nothing but rain, sir. The lookouts are half blind." "Keep them looking," Rourke ordered. "They're out here. I can smell them." He wasn't wrong. The Japanese were masters of the dark. The Imperial Japanese Navy, IJN, owned the night, running their Tokyo Express convoys of fast destroyers and light cruisers down the slot to resupply their beleaguered troops on Guadalcanal. They did it with an arrogance born of expertise. Their lookouts were legendary, trained for years to spot a ship's silhouette in the faintest starlight, and they had a weapon that terrified every Allied sailor in the Pacific, the Type 93 torpedo, the Long Lance. It was faster, had a longer range, and carried a warhead twice the size of its Allied counterparts. And it ran on pure compressed oxygen, which meant it left almost no visible wake. You never saw it coming. You only knew it was there when your ship dissolved in a pillar of fire. "Contact!" The shout came from the port lookout, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Ship, sir. Port bow. Bearing 300. Rourke and Davies snapped their binoculars up. Nothing. Just a wall of black rain. "Star shell!" Rourke bellowed. "Gunnery! Illuminate! Port bow!" Whoosh clang! The forward 4.7-inch gun fired. The shell screamed into the sky, a magnesium flare designed to burst and light up the sea. It never got the chance. A string of blindingly bright orange-white flashes erupted from the darkness exactly where the lookout had pointed. The sound followed a half-second later, the unmistakable, rapid crump, 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 crump of a Japanese cruiser's 5.5-inch guns. "Hard to starboard!" Rourke roared. "Make smoke!" The Japanese gunnery was terrifyingly accurate. They hadn't needed star shells. They had seen Vigilant first, their optics slicing through the rain. A fountain of water, impossibly high, erupted just 50 yards off the port beam. Then another, closer. Clang. A shell struck the aft funnel. It wasn't a critical hit, but hot shrapnel rained down on the deck. Men screamed. "They've got our range, sir," Davies yelled, ducking as shrapnel pinged off the bridge plating. "Where are they?" Rourke spat, frustrated, blind. Then, the deadliest sound of all. A lookout shrieked, "Torpedoes! Torpedoes in the water! Starboard side!" Rourke didn't hesitate. "Hard to port! All engines emergency full!" Vigilant heeled over violently, the deck tilting at a sickening angle. Rourke held his breath. He counted. 1, 2, 3. 2 white streaks, barely visible, slid past the stern, missing by less than 20 yards. They hadn't been Long Lances, probably destroyer torpedoes, but they were close enough. "Smoke is good, sir." Vigilant plunged into her own chemical fog, a choking acrid cloud that hid her from the enemy. The Japanese cruiser, unwilling to be drawn into a close-quarters brawl, ceased firing. Silence returned, broken only by the rain, the engines, and the groans of the wounded. Rourke slumped against the rail, his body shaking with adrenaline. They were alive, but only just. He looked at the glowing green dial of the engine room telegraph. They had escaped, but he knew, with a cold, sinking certainty, that they hadn't won. They had been outfought, outseen, and nearly destroyed by an enemy they never even laid eyes on. "Damage report," he said, his voice flat. and get us back to Espiritu Santo. We were lucky tonight, but luck wasn't a strategy. Luck was what you had before you died, and in the Solomon Islands in 1942, luck was running out. To understand the crisis facing the Royal Australian Navy, RAN, and their American allies in late 1942, one had to understand the unique, brutal geography of the Solomon Islands. It was not an open ocean war. It was a knife fight in an alley. The campaign was dominated by a long, narrow channel of water running down the center of the island chain, officially New Georgia Sound, but known to every sailor as the Slot. By day, Allied air power from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal ruled the skies, forcing the Japanese to hide. But when the sun went down, the Pacific became a different ocean. The Slot became the Tokyo Express. The Imperial Japanese Navy was, arguably, the most highly trained night fighting force in the world. This wasn't an accident, it was doctrine. Knowing they could likely never match the industrial output of the United States, Japan had invested heavily in two areas: superior torpedoes and superior night optics. Their lookouts were not just sailors with binoculars. They were specialists, men with exceptional eyesight, trained for years to detect the bone, the faint white V-shaped wake of a ship, or the subtle smudge of funnel smoke against a dark horizon from miles away. They were equipped with a range of massive, high-powered binoculars and monoculars, some stretching over a meter long, that gathered light with terrifying efficiency. While the Allies were fumbling with primitive, unreliable radar sets and star shells that announced their presence to the entire enemy fleet, the Japanese were slipping through the darkness, seeing without being seen. The Battle of Savo Island in August 1942 was the bloody proof. A combined Allied force of heavy cruisers, 3 American, 1 Australian, HMAS Canberra, had been tasked with protecting the Guadalcanal landings. In a chaotic 32-minute nocturnal battle, a Japanese force under Admiral Mikawa achieved total surprise, using float planes to drop flares behind the Allied ships, silhouetting them, and relying on their peerless lookouts, they devastated the Allied screen. HMS Canberra was hit 24 times in less than 2 minutes, reduced to a burning, powerless hulk. The American cruisers Astoria, Quincy, and Vincennes all followed her to the bottom. Over 1,000 Allied sailors were lost. The Japanese suffered almost no damage. It was a humiliation, but more than that, it was a tactical crisis. The Allies simply could not stop the Tokyo Express. They could not contest the night. This was the central problem. The terrain was the dark. The technology was the Japanese Type 93 Long Lance torpedo, a 24-inch behemoth that could strike from over 20 kilometers away, far outside Allied gun range. The tactic was the Japanese fleet's ability to see in that dark. The stakes were existential. If the Tokyo Express could not be stopped, the U.S. Marines on Guadalcanal would be starved, shelled, and ultimately overrun. The entire South Pacific campaign, the first major Allied offensive against Japan, would collapse, and Australia would be left perilously exposed, its northern shores just a short hop from the Japanese stronghold in Rabaul. The Allied navies were fighting a 20th century war with 19th century tactics. They were bringing knives to a gunfight, only to find the enemy had invented night vision goggles. They were losing ships, losing men, and losing the war. Naval Base, Espiritu Santo, 0917 hours, October 16, 1942. The air was thick, wet, and smelled of diesel fuel, rotting jungle, and welding torches. HMS Vigilant was tied up alongside a U.S. repair ship, a dummy tender that was little more than a floating workshop. The shrapnel damage to her funnel had been patched with a crude steel plate. On the fantail, a chaplain was committing 2 men to the deep. They weren't from the last engagement, but from the one before that. Sailors, bundled in canvas, sliding under a white ensign into the lukewarm harbor water. The bugler played the last post, the notes sounding flat and defeated in the humid air. Lieutenant Commander Rourke stood stiffly at attention, his cap over his heart. He felt a cold knot of anger in his gut. Good men, lost for nothing, lost because they were blind. After the service, he walked back to his cabin, the steel deck hot enough to fry an egg. He found his XO, Davies, and his gunnery officer, Lieutenant Guns Miller, waiting for him. The Yanks are sending a liaison officer over, Davies said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag. Wants our after-action report, in person. Let him come, Rourke grumbled. What's he going to tell us? That we were insufficiently aggressive? I'm tired of hearing it from men who haven't faced a long lance. Guns Miller, a career officer who believed in gunnery drills and little else, spoke up. Sir, the simple fact is we can't hit what we can't see. My spotters are the best in the RAN, but they're human. The Japs are something else. It's like they're cats. They can see in the bloody dark. So we just keep doing this? Rourke asked, his voice rising. Sail up the slot, fire star shells, give away our position, and pray we dodge the torpedoes? That's not a tactic. That's a lottery. The frustration was palpable across the fleet. Ship after ship limped back to Espiritu Santo, or the advance base at Tulagi, riddled with shrapnel, carrying the wounded and the dead. The routine was always the same: patrol, contact, illumination, a chaotic and blind exchange of fire, and a hasty retreat, often pursued by torpedoes. The American and Australian cruisers and destroyers were powerful ships. Their gunnery in daylight was excellent, but at night they were helpless. That afternoon, a crisp U.S. Navy commander arrived. He listened politely to Rourke's report in the tiny, stifling wardroom. Lieutenant Commander, the American said, his voice smooth, Admiral Turner appreciates your squadron's efforts. But efforts are not stopping the Express. We are losing the supply battle on Guadalcanal. The Marines are eating captured rice. We must interdict these runs. And how do you propose we do that, Commander? Rourke shot back, his patience gone. My lookouts have 8x binoculars. Theirs have 20x night optics. My guns have a range of 12,000 yards. Their torpedoes have a range of 22,000 yards. You're asking me to fight a sniper with a bayonet. The American stiffened. Your ship is equipped with a Type 286 radar set, is it not? Rourke laughed, a short, bitter bark. That set, the bed spring antenna. It's a joke. It's an aircraft warning set bolted to a mast. It can pick up a mountainous island at 20 miles, I'll give it that. But a destroyer? In sea clutter? It's useless. It's noise. It's more trouble than it's worth. Then I suggest you find a way to make it worth it, Commander, the American said coldly. Because Admiral King wants the slot closed, permanently. You're sailing in 48 hours. Don't be blind. The American left. Rourke, Miller, and Davies sat in the ringing silence, the humid air thick with failure. Bloody hell, Davies muttered. What does he expect us to do? Invent a magic eye? In the bowels of HMS Vigilant, in a space no bigger than a closet, was the radar shack. It was an insulated box of steel, hot, poorly ventilated, and filled with the high-pitched whine of transformers and the sharp, clean smell of ozone. This was the domain of Lieutenant David Sloan. Sloan was not a sailor. He had been in the RAN for less than a year. Before the war, he had been a doctoral candidate in physics at the University of Melbourne, a protege of the great minds at the Commonwealth's Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR. The CSIR's radiophysics laboratory in Sydney had been working in secret, building Australia's first radar sets from scratch, often using little more than British journals and sheer ingenuity. Sloan was pale, wore thick glasses, and was chronically seasick. He was painfully quiet, spoke in technical half-sentences, and was viewed by the bridge crew as an oddity, a boffin. But Sloan understood something that Rourke and Miller did not. He understood the physics of the noise that Rourke so despised. The Type 286 radar was, as Rourke noted, primitive. It was a British design, adapted from an RAF set, and its large fixed bed spring antenna could only point forward. It was clumsy, but Sloan had been studying its A-scope, the small green cathode ray tube that served as the display. It wasn't a modern radar sweep. It was a single horizontal line. A blip from a target would appear as a vertical spike or grass, pushing up from the line. The problem was, in anything but a dead calm sea, the line was covered in grass. Waves, rain, and atmospheric interference, known as sea clutter, made it impossible to pick out a ship. Sloan sat on a metal stool, staring at the pulsating green line, his headphones clamped on. He was listening to the sound of the radar returns, a skill he'd developed. A high-pitched peep for a solid return, a mushy hiss for clutter. He had been reading the American commander's report on the Type 286's failures. Useless for surface search. Cannot discriminate small targets. Sloan disagreed. The problem wasn't just the set, it was the doctrine. Everyone was looking for a single obvious spike. But what if a ship wasn't a single spike? What if it was a pattern in the noise? He had an idea. It was born of desperation and physics. The British were already developing new centimetric radar using microwave frequencies, which gave a much sharper picture. But those sets were years away from reaching a small Australian destroyer in the South Pacific. Sloan had to work with what he had. His idea was twofold. First, the display. He could modify the receiver's gain, dampening the clutter just enough so that a solid metallic object would punch through the noise. It was a delicate balance. Too much gain and you were blind. Too little and you missed the target. Second, and more radically, he wanted to change the antenna. The fixed bed spring was useless, but Vigilant also had a small rotating radio direction finding RDF antenna. It was for navigation, not radar. What if he borrowed its rotating motor? He sketched a diagram on a notepad, his pencil flying. He would network the 286's transmitter to a new, smaller rotating antenna, one he would have to build himself from spare parts. Instead of a fixed A-scope, he could create a rudimentary plan position indicator, PPI, a circular screen that actually painted the targets as the antenna rotated. It was impossibly ambitious. It was unauthorized modification of highly secret equipment. It was, in short, exactly what the American commander had, in his own way, ordered. He tucked the notepad into his shirt and, swaying with the gentle motion of the ship at anchor, he climbed the ladder to the bridge. He had to find the captain. Rourke was in his sea cabin drinking lukewarm, bitter coffee when the knock came. "Enter." Lieutenant Sloan slipped into the room, blinking in the relative light. He looked as always like a man who had just misplaced his university lecture notes. "Sir, Lieutenant Commander Rourke, I have a proposal regarding the Type 286. Rourke sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Mr. Sloan, I have read the reports. The Yanks have read the reports. It's an aircraft warning set. It doesn't work on ships. End of story." "That's not entirely accurate, sir," Sloan said, his voice quiet but firm. "It doesn't work as configured. The doctrine is wrong. We're using it like a lighthouse. We should be using it like a scalpel." Sloan unrolled his diagram on the captain's small chart table. Rourke glanced at it. It was a mess of symbols, wiring paths, and mathematical formulas. "In layman's terms, Lieutenant, I'm just a simple sailor. Sir, the problem is signal-to-noise ratio. The noise is the sea itself. The signal is the Japanese destroyer," Sloan explained, his hands gesturing nervously. "Right now we're letting all the noise in. The lookouts, they're using a biological filter, the human eye and brain. I believe I can create an electronic filter." He pointed to the diagram. "I want to change the display. But more importantly, I need to build a new antenna, a smaller one, and I need to make it spin." "Spin?" Rourke looked up, his interest piqued for the first time. "Like the new American sets? The SG radar?" A much simpler, cruder version, sir. Yes, a plan position indicator, a map. It will paint a picture of what's out there, in the dark, in the rain." Rourke was silent. He looked at the drawing. He looked at this pale, earnest boffin who looked like he'd never been in a fistfight. "This is," Rourke paused, "highly irregular. You're talking about tearing apart a secret piece of equipment. If you break it, we're blinder than we were before. And if the Yanks find out we've been tinkering—" "Sir," Sloan pressed, "with respect, what do we have to lose? We sail in 48 hours. By your own admission, the set is currently useless. The worst I can do is make it still useless. But if I'm right—" "If you're right, what?" Rourke said, standing up. "What will I see?" "You won't see anything, sir," Sloan replied. "I will. I will see a blip. And I will give you a bearing and a range. A precise bearing and range. In total darkness." The sheer audacity of it hung in the air. Rourke paced the tiny cabin. He thought of the two canvas-wrapped bodies sliding into the harbor. He thought of the look on the American commander's face. Don't be blind. Guns Miller had joined them, drawn by the conversation. He looked at the diagram with open contempt. "Captain, this is madness," Miller said. "We're going to trust our gunnery solution, our lives, to this television experiment? My spotters are trained. My fire control calculators are calibrated. This is voodoo. It's physics, Mr. Miller," Sloan said quietly. "Call it what you want, son." "I call it a distraction," Miller retorted. "What happens when your blip turns out to be a rain cloud and we've just given away our position to a Jap cruiser?" "That's a fair question, Guns," Rourke said, holding up a hand. He turned to Sloan. "Can you tell the difference between a cloud and a ship?" Sloan hesitated. "I believe so. A solid object will have a harder edge, a crisper return. A rain squall will be mushy. It will take practice, but yes, sir, I believe I can." Rourke stared at Sloan for a long, heavy moment. He was a gambler by nature. Every destroyer captain was. He was betting his ship and his crew every time he left the harbor. This was just a new kind of bet. "Find the chief engineer," Rourke ordered, turning to Miller. "Tell Sparky to give Mr. Sloan whatever he needs. Spare cabling, brass fittings, the motor from the bloody RDF, whatever he asks for." Miller looked appalled. "Sir, the navigation..." "Navigation be damned," Rourke snapped. "We know where the slot is. I need to know where the enemy is. You have 48 hours, Mr. Sloan. Make your magic eye. But God help you if it's a distraction when the shooting starts." Sloan nodded, his face pale but determined. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." "I bloody well better not," Rourke muttered as Sloan hurried out. "I better not." The next 40 hours were a blur of organized chaos. The radar shack and the small workshop adjacent to it became a place of frantic, desperate creation. The heat was indescribable, a solid, living thing that clung to the skin. Sweat dripped from Sloan's nose onto his diagrams, smudging the ink. He was joined by Chief Petty Officer Sparky Jones, the ship's senior electrical technician. Jones was a grizzled veteran who understood the ship's wiring better than the men who'd built her. He was Rourke's man, and his initial skepticism was plain. "Tear out the RDF motor, sir?" Jones had said, his bushy eyebrows raised. "Captain knows that's our backup if the gyro goes, right?" "Captain's orders, Chief," Sloan replied, already pulling a panel off the radar's main console. "Right," Jones sighed, grabbing a wrench. His ship, his funeral, let's get to it. Their first task was the antenna. They couldn't use the big bed spring. It was too heavy for the small RDF motor. Sloan designed a new one, a Yagi array, which looked like a small, complex television antenna. They built it using spare copper tubing from the plumbing stores and brass fittings from the engine room. They mounted this new, lighter array onto the repurposed motor, which Jones cleverly waterproofed with a heavy canvas boot and a generous application of grease. The second, harder job was the display. Sloan wasn't just filtering the A-scope. He was building an entirely new one. He needed a circular plan position indicator, PPI. The only spare cathode ray tube, CRT, on the ship was in the ASDIC sonar locker, a tiny 5-inch screen meant for hunting submarines. Sloan and Jones liberated it. For hours, they worked with soldering irons, the smell of burning rosin filling the shack. They scavenged capacitors and resistors from broken radio sets. Jones, his initial cynicism fading as he saw Sloan's obsessive, brilliant work, became a convert. "This deflection coil," Jones muttered, holding a component Sloan had wound by hand. "You're feeding the motor's rotation directly to the coil." "Yes, Chief," Sloan said, not looking up from a tangle of wires. "The motor's position has to be mechanically linked to the sweep of the electron beam on the tube. As the antenna turns, the line on the screen turns with it. When a signal comes in, it will brighten the line, not spike it. A blip will be a paint of light." "It's bloody clever, sir. Begging your pardon," Jones said, a new respect in his voice. "It's a proper map." They worked through the night. Men brought them sandwiches and mugs of tea, which sat untouched and went cold. By dawn on the second day, it was done. The new antenna was mounted on the mast, looking small and slightly ridiculous. In the radar shack, the new 5-inch screen glowed with a faint greenish light. A single line rotated in time with the antenna, sweeping in a 360-degree circle once every 3 seconds. The center of the screen was vigilant. "Right," Sloan said, his voice hoarse. "Let's test it." He flipped a switch. The screen instantly filled with a snowstorm of green static. It was the clutter from the waves in the harbor. "It's a bloody mess, sir," Jones said, his heart sinking. "Wait," Sloan whispered. He turned a new dial he had installed, his custom gain filter. He twisted it slowly. The snowstorm began to fade. He kept twisting. The screen went almost dark. "Too much, sir." "No, wait." Sloan turned it back, a fraction of a millimeter. The screen was mostly dark, but now faint, solid paints of light appeared. "What's that?" Jones asked, pointing. Sloan cross-referenced the bearing with the harbor chart. "That is the breakwater. Range, 2 miles. And that's the American tender, USS Dixie. Range, 800 yards. And that," he pointed to a smear of light, "is the shore of Espiritu Santo." He looked at Jones, a wild, exhausted grin on his face. "It works, Chief. It bloody well works." The slot, north of Guadalcanal, 2350 hours, October 18th, 1942. Chimaeus Vigilant was back in the shooting gallery. The night was dark, but the sea was calmer than before. On the bridge, the mood was tense. Rourke paced, his binoculars to his eyes, sweeping the horizon. "Lookouts report." "Nothing, sir. Eyes are clean." "Mr. Miller, are your crews ready?" "Ready, sir," Guns Miller replied, his voice tight. He was manning the fire control director, his eyes glued to his own optics, trusting in what he could see, which was nothing. Below, in the radar shack, Sloan and Jones huddled over the 5-inch screen. The air was so hot it was hard to breathe. The green line swept, round and round. The screen was clear, just a faint haze of nearby clutter. Sloan's hand was steady on his gain dial. A voice pipe from the bridge whistled. "Radar, what do you see?" It was Rourke. "Nothing yet, sir," Sloan replied, his voice calm, though his heart was hammering. "Sweep is clear to 20 miles. They sailed on. Midnight passed. The only sound was the thrum of the turbines and the hiss of the bow wave. Then, at 0:17 hours, it happened. A tiny pinprick of light painted on the screen. It was faint. It was 1/100th of a second long. The line swept past it. The screen was dark. 3 seconds later, the line returned. Paint. The blip was there again, in the exact same spot. "Contact." Sloan's voice, amplified by the bridge speaker, was electric. "Contact. Bearing 030. Range, 18,000 yards." On the bridge, every man froze. Rourke and Miller snapped their binoculars to that bearing. "Nothing," Miller barked. "Lookout, see nothing. Radar, check your set. It's a ghost." Sloan's eyes were glued to the screen. Paint, paint, paint. "It's not a ghost, sir," he said, his voice shaking but certain. "It's solid, and it's moving. Course, 190. Speed, 25 knots. It's on an opposing course. A Japanese destroyer, running the express." "Guns," Rourke said, his voice a low command. "Train your directors. Bearing 030. Miller was appalled. "Sir, I have no visual. I can't spot for fall of shot. This is madness." "Train the guns, Mr. Miller," Rourke commanded. "Radar, keep feeding me the solution. I want a continuous range." "Aye, sir," Sloan called back. "Range 17,000 yards, 16,500. He's closing fast." The 4.7-inch turrets whirred, slaving to the new blind bearing. The gun crews were baffled, loading rounds to fire at an empty ocean. "This is it, Sloan," Rourke muttered to himself. "Your magic eye." "Range 14,000 yards," Sloan called. "Mr. Miller," Rourke said. "Permission to illuminate." "Thank God," Miller breathed. "Gunnery, fire 1 star shell, on solution!" Whoosh clang! The shell arced high into the night. The entire bridge crew held their breath. The shell burst, a brilliant cascading white light. And there, caught in the sudden harsh glare, exactly where the guns were pointing, was a Japanese Kagero-class destroyer. She was completely, utterly surprised. Her guns were trained fore and aft. She had been caught, naked, in the dark. A collective gasp went up from the lookouts. "My God," Miller whispered. He was right. "Guns!" Rourke roared, his blood on fire. "Open fire! Fire for effect!" The main battery erupted in a deafening, blinding salvo. Because Miller's directors were already on target, the first shells were close. The Japanese ship, realizing its peril, began to turn hard to port, firing its own guns wildly. But it was too late. They had lost the first decisive 30 seconds. Vigilant had the range. She had the solution. "We are not the target tonight," Rourke growled as his ship's guns pounded the enemy. "Thank you, Mr. Sloan." Off Kolombangara, the slot, 0109 hours, November 1st, 1942. This was no test. This was the real thing. Intelligence had reported a major Tokyo Express run, 3 Japanese destroyers, heavy with troops and supplies, escorted by a light cruiser. HMAS Vigilant was part of a small task force, 2 American destroyers and another Australian, HMAS Arunta, sent to intercept. But a vicious rain squall had separated the force. Vigilant was alone. Worse, the squall had rendered visual spotting completely impossible. It was a thick, roaring curtain of water, a night so dark Rourke felt he could reach out and tear a piece of it. This was perfect Japanese weather. They would be in their element, their lookouts straining, their long lances ready. On the bridge, Rourke stood in the open, the rain lashing his face. "Mr. Sloan," he spoke into the voice pipe, his voice calm. "The bridge is yours. Tell me what you see." In the radar shack, Sloan and Jones stared at the 5-inch screen. The rain was mush on the scope, a big hazy cloud. But Sloan, his hand riding the gain dial with a surgeon's delicacy, was filtering through it. "Sir," Sloan's voice came back, strained but clear. "I have contacts, multiple contacts, inside the squall, bearing 090. Range, 20,000 yards. How many?" They're in a line ahead formation. I count. 1, 2, 3. No, 4 targets, sir. 4 ships. 4. The entire enemy force. And they had no idea Vigilant was there. They would be relying on their lookouts, who could see nothing in this rain. They were blind. For the first time, they were blind. Rourke felt a cold, thrilling certainty. "Guns. Mr. Miller, you hear that?" I hear it, sir," Miller said. He had been a full convert since the last patrol. "Plotting is tracking Mr. Sloan's solution." "Sir," Sloan's voice again. "The lead contact is larger. The paint is stronger. That must be the cruiser. The other 3 are destroyers. Range 18,000 yards. They're not changing course." Rourke made a decision. It was radical. It was against every rule of naval warfare written before 1942. "Mr. Miller," Rourke said, "we are not illuminating. We will not fire star shells." "Sir, this ship," Rourke said, his voice dropping, "is going to fire a full broadside for effect into total darkness, based only on Mr. O. Sloan's solution. No spotters, no visual, just the blips. This was the moment. The true trial. Trusting the machine, trusting the boffin. "Range 14,000 yards, Sloan called, his voice a metronome. "Steady on course. They're completely unaware." "Guns, load high explosive," Rourke ordered. "Target the lead ship, the cruiser." "Loaded, sir." "Range 12,500 yards, 12,000. "Fire," Rourke said quietly. Boom! The ship leaped sideways as all 4 of her forward 4.7-inch guns fired as one. The shells vanished into the black rain, invisible arcs carrying nearly 200 pounds of high explosive. On the bridge they counted. 1, 2, 3, 28, 29, 30. A sudden, brilliant orange flash lit the horizon from within the rain squall. It was not a star shell. It was a massive explosion. It was followed a second later by a second, brighter flash. "Hit! Hit! We got a hit!" A lookout screamed. Sloan's voice was almost a shout.
"Target is hit, sir. I see it on the scope. It's breaking up. The blip is fragmenting." "Shift target," Rourke roared, alive with the hunt. "Target the second ship in line. Fire at will! The guns roared again. The Japanese, thrown into absolute chaos, had been struck by a thunderbolt from a black sky. They had no idea who was shooting, or from where. They did the only thing they could. They fired their long lances, but they were firing blind. Their torpedoes were launched in a wide, desperate fan, aimed at the muzzle flashes they could now see. "Hard to port," Rourke ordered, having anticipated this. "Combat turn." Vigilant swung, her own guns still firing. Bright white streaks of the long lances passed harmlessly through the water she had occupied just seconds before. Sloane's voice was the calm center of the storm. "Second target is hit, sir. It's slowing. The other two, they're scattering. They're turning away." "They're running!" "Chase them," Rourke snarled. "Guns! Keep firing!" For 15 minutes, HMAS Vigilant fought an entire Japanese squadron, alone, in a rainstorm. She was an invisible predator. When the squall finally passed, the scene was revealed. One Japanese destroyer was gone, sunk by the first salvo. The light cruiser Tenryu, a fictional stand-in, was burning fiercely, dead in the water. A second destroyer was listing, trailing heavy oil. The fourth was disappearing over the horizon at flank speed. Vigilant had not been hit, not once. She had not suffered a single casualty. Rourke walked into the radar shack. Sloane was slumped over his console, covered in sweat, his hands still shaking. Rourke put a heavy hand on his shoulder. Sloane looked up, his eyes wide. "Mr. Sloane," Rourke said, his voice thick with emotion. "You just changed the war." When HMS Vigilant steamed back into Espiritu Santo, she did not limp. She arrived with all guns trained fore and aft, her battle ensign flying. Her after-action report was not a story of a lucky escape. It was a cold, technical, and brutal receipt for one cruiser, and one destroyer confirmed destroyed, and another crippled. The report landed on the desk of an American rear admiral, a fictionalized version of a man like Bull Halsey's tactical chief with the force of a depth charge. He read it. He read it again. He summoned the American liaison commander Rourke had clashed with. "Did you read this?" the admiral demanded. "Yes, sir. It seems exaggerated." "Exaggerated?" The admiral slammed the paper. The Aussies claimed they engaged a 4-ship squadron alone in a zero-visibility rain squall. They claim they fired blind on radar solution only and achieved hits on the first salvo. They claim 0 casualties. Get Rourke in here. Now. Rourke, clean and pressed, stood before the admiral. He brought Sloane with him. "Commander," the admiral said, his voice hard, "I've been in this Navy for 30 years. I've never read a report like this." "Is it true?" "Every word, sir," Rourke said. "This is Lieutenant Sloane, my radar officer. He's the man who did it." For an hour, Sloane, quiet and technical, explained his modifications. He explained the Sloane modification, as Jones had dubbed it, the hand-built Yagi antenna, the repurposed RDF motor, the ASDIC display, and, most importantly, the custom-built clutter filter. The admiral, an old gunnery man, was stunned. "You mean to tell me you're not using the A-scope? You built a PPI?" "Yes, sir. It just seemed more logical. To see a map." The admiral looked at his liaison. "This Boffin, as you call him, has built a $2 million radar system out of spare parts and a sonar screen." A domino effect began, and it fell with blinding speed. A team of engineers from the CSIR in Australia, and, more significantly, from the MIT Radiation Laboratory in the US, were flown to Espiritu Santo. They were secretive men in civilian clothes who huddled in Vigilance radar shack, reverse engineering Sloane's field expedient solution. They were amazed. Sloane had, through necessity and intuition, arrived at solutions that their labs were only just beginning to implement. His crude, hand-wound filter was, in principle, a swept-gain amplifier, a key piece of high-end radar. Within weeks, a new directive was issued to the entire US and Australian fleet in the South Pacific. Effective immediately, all surface combatants equipped with Type 286 SC or SG radar sets will establish a radar plot, or Combat Information Center. Gunnery solutions based solely on radar plots are authorized in low visibility conditions. All ships are to emulate the tactical doctrine pioneered by HMAS Vigilant.
The Sloan modification itself was soon replaced by mass-produced superior American SG radar sets. But the tactic, the idea, that an Australian lieutenant had proven was the real innovation. He had proven that you could trust the scope. The Ghost Gunner, as Vigilant was now nicknamed, became a legend. Sailors in bars from Tulagi to Sydney traded stories about the Aussie destroyer that could see in the dark. The Japanese, suddenly finding their ships exploding at night for no reason, were baffled, attributing the losses to bombers, submarines, or even a new invisible torpedo. The tactical advantage of the IJN, built on 2 decades of elite night training, was erased in one night by a physicist in a hot steel box. The innovation didn't stop with Sloan. As the new American SG radars, with their clear, bright PPI screens, were installed across the fleet, the Combat Information Center, CIC, became the nerve center of the ship. But the Vigilance crew, now the experts, continued to push the envelope. Guns Miller, now a radar evangelist, worked with Sloan to refine the blind fire technique. They realized they didn't have to guess at the type of ship. By watching the blip's speed and movement, they could tell a fast-moving destroyer from a heavier, slower cruiser. "Look, sir," Sloan explained to Rourke, pointing at the scope. "This one, it turns sharply, tight turning circle. That's a destroyer. But this one, see how it makes a wider, more gradual turn? That's a cruiser. We can pick our targets before we even fire a shot." They developed new ambush tactics. Vigilant would lie in wait, dead in the water, hull down behind a small island, completely invisible. Sloan would track the Tokyo Express as it approached, his antenna spinning, his transmitter on low power to avoid detection. Rourke would wait, letting the Japanese sail past him. Then, at the optimal moment, he would give the order. Vigilance engines would roar to life. She would dash out from cover, and her guns, already laid on the radar solution, would open fire at point-blank range. It was a massacre. The Japanese were not stupid. They knew something had changed. Their patrols were being savaged. Their own primitive radar sets were useless, and their new radar warning receivers, simple devices designed to hear an enemy's radar beam, began to give them a fighting chance. On a patrol in December 1942, Sloan watched a target. "Sir, I have a contact. Range 22,000 yards." "Track him," Rourke said. "Sir, wait." The moment my beam painted him, he changed course. "He's turning away." Rourke stiffened. "He heard you. He knows we're here." The game had changed again. The enemy was adapting. Sloan adapted back. "Chief," he said to Jones, "we need to rig a cutoff switch. We'll let the antenna spin, but we'll only ping for 1/2 second every 30 seconds, just long enough to get a snapshot. He might not notice a single quick ping." It worked. The cat-and-mouse game of electronic warfare had begun. The enemy would deploy chaff, strips of aluminum foil, to create ghost contacts. Sloan learned to identify the mushy, slow-moving signature of a chaff cloud versus the hard blip of a real ship. The era of the lookout was over. The era of the scopehead had begun. The RAN and USN were now 2 years ahead, not just in technology, but in the art of using it. Success came at a price. HMS Vigilant was no longer just another destroyer. She was the tip of the spear. She and her sisters in the new radar-equipped hunter-killer groups were sent on the most dangerous missions, night after night. The crew was stretched to the breaking point. The relentless thrum-thrum of the turbines, the adrenaline-flooded action stations' alarms, the nights spent staring at a green screen. It was exhausting. Sloan felt the weight most of all. He had been promoted to lieutenant commander, his advice sought by admirals. But he was still the same quiet man from Melbourne. One night, they intercepted a small, lone Japanese destroyer. It was a quick, brutal, one-sided affair. Vigilant hit it with 3 salvos before the Japanese ship could even fire back. It sank in less than 5 minutes. As dawn broke, Rourke ordered the whaler lowered to search for survivors, a rare act of mercy in the Bitter Solomons campaign. They pulled a handful of wounded, oil-soaked Japanese sailors from the water. They were brought aboard, stripped, and laid on the deck, their burns treated by Vigilance medic. Sloan, unable to sleep, came out on deck for air. He saw the men. One of them, A young officer no older than Sloan himself, conscious and glaring with pure, undiluted hatred, locked eyes with him. Sloan stopped. In the radar shack, it had been a blip, a target, a solution. Here on his deck was the human result. A man, his ship gone, his friends dead, his body burned, all because of a paint of light on a 5-inch screen. This new warfare was clean, electronic, and impersonal. It was also, Sloan realized, horrifyingly efficient. There was no seeing the whites of their eyes. There was only the peep of the signal and the order to fire. He had become a new kind of executioner, one who never had to look his victim in the face. The young Japanese officer spat at Sloan's feet, a gesture of ultimate contempt. Sloan just stood there, his hands in his pockets, before turning and walking back to the shadows of his radar shack. Rourke, too, faced new costs. Overconfidence. He had come to rely on Sloan's magic eye so completely that he began to take risks. On one patrol, he steamed aggressively toward a group of contacts, ignoring Sloan's warning that they were acting strangely. "They're milling, sir," Sloan had warned. "They aren't in formation. This feels like a trap." "Nonsense, Mr. Sloan. They're disorganized," Rourke said, smelling another kill. "Full speed ahead." It was a trap. A Japanese cruiser and 2 destroyers, using a submarine as a radar picket, were waiting. They opened fire with a full illuminated broadside. Shells straddled Vigilant. It was only Rourke's superb seamanship and Sloan's ability to track the shell splashes on his radar in reverse to plot the enemy's position that allowed them to escape. They returned to base with a 6-inch hole in their bow. Rourke was humbled. The technology was a tool, not a crystal ball. It had given them an edge, but the ocean was still the ocean, and the enemy was still deadly. The tipping point came in November 1942. The naval battle of Guadalcanal was a series of chaotic, brutal slugfests. But in the destroyer actions, the new radar-guided tactics proved decisive. The true culmination of Sloan's innovation came a year later at the Battle of Cape St. George in November 1943. By now, the U.S. Navy had fully embraced the CIC concept. A force of 5 American destroyers, under Captain Arleigh Burke, intercepted a Japanese destroyer evacuation run. It was a perfect execution of the tactics Vigilant had pioneered. Using their new superior radars, Burke's ships stalked the Japanese force. They achieved complete surprise, firing torpedoes and guns on radar solutions before the Japanese lookouts saw a thing. The Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makinami, and Yugumo, were blown out of the water. The American force suffered 0 damage. The Battle of Cape St. George was called the perfect naval engagement. It was the final nail in the coffin of the Tokyo Express. The Japanese attempt to supply their garrisons by sea was over. Guadalcanal was secured. The tide in the Solomons had turned, and the long, bloody march to Tokyo had truly begun. HMS Vigilant, too battered and worn for the front lines, was eventually rotated home to Sydney for a major refit. She was a hero ship. Lieutenant Commander David Sloan was quietly awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. His citation was vague, praising his technical proficiency and devotion to duty under fire. The real reason, his Sloan modification, was classified. It was too important. Commander Jack "Salty" Rourke was promoted to captain and given command of a new cruiser, HMAS Shropshire. His recommendation for Sloan was less vague. Lieutenant Commander Sloan, through his singular genius and scientific courage, provided this fleet with the weapon that broke the back of the enemy's nocturnal supremacy. He turned our blindness into sight. More than any other man, he is responsible for our victory in the slot. The IJN's fatal weakness was not just their inability to develop radar as fast as the Allies. It was, as the Australians had proved, their doctrinal failure to counter it. Their 2-year head start in night fighting tactics was rendered obsolete by an Australian destroyer that was, thanks to one man, 2 years ahead in electronic warfare. Canberra, Australia, 1987. The television studio lights were hot. An elderly man, thin, with a shock of white hair and the same thick glasses, sat patiently as a young interviewer adjusted his microphone. He was Professor Emeritus David Sloan, a man who had spent 40 years teaching theoretical physics at the Australian National University. His students knew him as a kind, if somewhat distracted lecturer who was brilliant with waveform mechanics. Few, if any, knew what he had done during the war. "Professor," the interviewer began, "we're here to talk about the CSIR's role in the war. You were part of the radiophysics lab. Tell us about that." Sloan smiled, a faint, papery dry smile. "Yes, we were very busy. We were trying to see in the dark, you see. A long-range project. But you didn't stay in the lab." The interviewer pressed. "You served at sea, on HMS Vigilant." Sloan's eyes seemed to look past the camera, back across 4 decades to a small, green screen. "Yes, I was at sea for a time, on Vigilant. The Ghost Gunner," the interviewer said. "There are legends about that ship, that you had a special kind of radar, that you could see things no one else could." Sloan nodded slowly. "We had a modification. It was a team effort, really. Chief Jones, he was a miracle worker with a soldering iron. And Captain Rourke, he was the one who took the risk. He was the one who trusted the physics." The interviewer leaned in. "They say the Vigilant was 2 years ahead of the Japanese, that you single-handedly ended the reign of the Long Lance torpedo." Sloan held up a hand, deflecting the praise. "Nothing so grand. The Japanese they were the finest night fighters in the world. Their lookouts, I've never seen anything like it. They trained their eyes for a decade. We just built a better eye, a different kind, an electronic one." He reached into his tweed jacket pocket and pulled out a small glass and metal object, a vacuum tube. "This is a VT-99, an acorn tube," he said, turning it over in his old wrinkled fingers. "This was the heart of it, this little thing. It's what allowed us to filter the noise from the signal. It seems so simple now." The historian's voiceover would later explain the grand strategy. It would confirm that the Australian CSIR's early groundbreaking work on microwave radar, combined with the desperate frontline innovations of men like Sloan, had indeed created a tactical gap. While the Japanese Navy, right up until 1V9944, was still relying on superior optics, Allied ships, led by Australian pioneers, were killing them from 20,000 yards away in pitch-black, storm-ridden nights. The interviewer had one last question. "When you look back, Professor, all those ships, all those men, how does it feel, knowing what you invented, what it did?" David Sloan looked down at the simple vacuum tube in his palm. His expression was not one of pride or of triumph. It was one of deep, profound ambiguity. He thought of the blips on his screen, and he thought of the young, hate-filled Japanese officer on his deck. "It was," he said, his voice just a whisper, "a necessary thing. In a war, you do what you must. You do what you must to bring your own boys home. You just try to see in the dark." The final shot was of the 5-inch radar screen, preserved in the Australian War Memorial. A single green line, sweeping, 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 forever hunting for a signal in the noise. I hope you enjoyed that deep dive into the hidden technological battles of the Pacific War. Would you like me to explore another forgotten innovation, perhaps about the wooden wonder mosquito or the crucial role of code breakers?